And let's just keep doing that. We don't need to be affiliated with one side or another to say that everybody ought to have a voice. We don't need to be affiliated with one side or another in order to say we ought to listen to different perspectives. We don't need to have one position or another in order to hear what somebody else has to say and be informed by it. So we're going to give it another 10 seconds and then we'll get this show on the road. We have a great discussion today on the digital divide. In other words, the internet technology is so important to our daily lives, so important to what we do every day, that if we don't provide access, are we actually harming our society? Because by excluding people, we can't be the America that we ought to be. And we have great leaders here who are going to be discussing this with us. I see that we've joined our live streams, Twitter Live, YouTube Live, and Facebook Live. So let's go through the introduction, and we'll get to the real juicy parts. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're discussing the digital divide, access to the internet, and critical technologies that are needed in this modern digital world with our special guests, Cyndy U. Robinson, Executive Director of the Kramden Institute in North Carolina, Joe Paul, CEO of Byte in DC. Joe, I love the name of your organization, and Scot Henley, Executive Director of Digitunity. Love that name as well. Based in New Hampshire, but you work across the US. And a reminder to Zoom attendees that we'll take 3 snap polls during the show. We'll announce results, and your questions submitted through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen will be included in our discussion. So I'm very excited. This is going to be a great discussion. And I just want to set you up, and we're going to go over to you, Cyndy. So when I was coming up, all I needed was a piece of paper and a number 2 pencil. I could write on a blank piece of paper. I could give my ideas. I would have to be physically present in order to listen to a teacher. We had non-digital mechanisms like paper and the number 2 pencil. We had a blackboard, what a concept. And we all sat in the same chairs. It didn't matter if we were wealthy or not wealthy. It really didn't. We had the exact same experiences. There was a real level playing field, but that's not the case today. It is just not. So, Cyndy, could you just comment on the Kramden Institute, what you do? And we're going to go around the table real quick so you can each give us a summary of what each of the organizations do and your take on it. And then we're going to talk about some of these issues. Cyndy?
Yes. So the Kramden Institute, based in North Carolina, is a provider of education as well as devices to bridge a digital divide. We have, in the last 19 years, given 85,000 computers to 84% of North Carolina.
85,000 computers.
85,000 computers.
That's great.
So we do that by the graces of sponsorship, as well as individual and business equipment donations. We refurbish them and then we give them away to K-12 students as well as low income adults. This is to help them with 2 parts of digital equity. One is a device, the other is education and the confidence to get online. And then the third part, I'm sure Scott will talk more about, is internet connectivity. So right now in North Carolina, about 20% of households do not have a computer at home. So that means they are not able to participate in online classes. Their parents don't work from home. They can't do telehealth. They can't participate in social or entertainment activities. They're not downloading Netflix like you or I. They're not watching news broadcasts. They can't even get information about FEMA or disasters or active shooters. I recently read
even getting information that you would get in a newspaper. A lot of newspapers are no longer publishing other than
that's correct.
World.
Yeah. So we are very happy to work with clients of all different ages and backgrounds, and we have to work with them slowly. They're not even on the playing field. We're talking about leveling the playing field. They're not even on the playing field. So we're very happy to be able to do that.
Joe, give us Byte Back's Byte Back, Fight Back, sort of take that energy and give it back. what is Byte's take on this?
Absolutely. For the next hour, I'll explain to you what Byte is. But I'll tell you, for the past 25 years, we've been providing under-resourced communities an equitable pathway into the digital economy. And we do that through transformative digital literacy, digital advocacy, and tech certification training. One of our crowning achievements is the A+ tech certification that sort of gives you an entry into tech. It's highly recognized by industry as the entry point into tech. And the under-resourced communities that we serve, 9 out of 10 tech jobs are not held by Black and Latinx members of society. And so we're working to
let's repeat that. That's really, really important. Could you repeat that statistic?
Most certainly. 9 out of 10 tech jobs are not held by Black or Latinx community members.
And even in places where there are concentrations of African American and Latin Hispanic communities, that statistic is also true.
No question about it. And this is exactly why we're working as hard as we are. We've managed to scale our program up to now. Let me tell you a quick stat. 30% pass rate, national pass rate for the A+ tech certification. We are certifying 75% of the people who come through our door. And it doesn't cost them a thing. And so we're extremely proud of that. Most of the folks who graduate from our program earn 4 times the salary that they had before they walked into the door. And so we're creating a critical mass of under-resourced community members who want to have an entry point into tech by getting them to pass A+, and we're getting them hired at outstanding organizations. And this year we were recognized as the nonprofit of the year by DC Chamber of Commerce. And so some of the things that we do, and we don't do it alone, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So we're not alone in this. We work with a lot of organizations and community-based organizations who help us accomplish the goals that we have. We've upskilled thousands and thousands of folks annually.
Now this is the old give a person a fish and you feed them for a day, or her for a day, or them for a day.
That's exactly right.
You shoot the fish, right? And you change whole communities, right?
You really do. And you know what's interesting, 30 seconds. We had a program participant who saw one of our bus ads while she was coming off of work. She worked as a server at IHOP. She was making a couple $100s a week. She called our program hotline. She enrolled in our program. She trusted the process. Now she's working in tech, making over $90,000 a year. This is the first time she's ever had health insurance. And not only has she been affected and impacted, but her family has, and her community members. And now she's the hottest thing on the block, and everyone's coming to Byte back because of that story. So yes, it does affect the community, and we're teaching them how to fish more.
That's superb. Scott, I was just talking with John Gage yesterday. John is one of the founders of Sun Microsystems, and he coined the term that the network is the computer. Talk about your work and the importance of that ability to connect to this massive worldwide utility, and how important that is as well.
Yeah, thank you. And so Digitunity, we're a national nonprofit focused on advancing digital equity through device ownership. 36 million people in America don't own a computer. And so here we are in 2022, right, and smartphones are a key part of it, but large screen devices are really the key to unlocking opportunity. So desktops, laptops, Chromebooks, tablets, having the ability to take full advantage of all the opportunity that the internet provides, as Cyndy was saying earlier, from telehealth to education to employment to just civic engagement, communication, and on and on and on. So our organization, we are working to, on a national scale, figure out where in the supply chain interventions can be deployed so that we can unlock wide supply of low cost or free devices for people in need across the country. And then we're also working in communities around the country to help develop systems of distribution. So reaching those who are in need of a device through community-based organizations, through anchor institutions, through great partners like Kramden and Byte Back and organizations like that around the country. And so owning a device is the key that unlocks opportunities, and that's the lens through which we're looking at this issue.
I'm trying to change my own habits. The computer that I'm working off of is at this point, I think I purchased it in 2013 or 2014 because I did not want to go and have that destroyed. It's a perfectly good computer. But when I decide to move on, I want to take whatever technology works and make sure somebody else gets a chance to use it rather than trash it. The same thing. I have a cell phone and a backup cell phone.
Mhm.
I don't throw things away unless it's totally destroyed, because other people, particularly a young person who doesn't need heavy processing and the network connectivity will allow them to do a lot of things. Could you talk, Scott, about the fact that we used to be all sort of device heavy, but now it's the connectivity piece that's so important. And, AI and those kinds of things, that's really done centrally by computers with a lot more processing power, perhaps, than we might possess in our hands. How do you ensure that you also have connectivity? Because these devices working in isolation aren't that powerful compared to previously.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's a number of organizations using a number of approaches to try to get more people connected. One particular approach right now has been made possible by the federal government. The ACP, Affordable Connectivity Program, allows individuals to obtain subsidized low-cost internet and a subsidized device as well. And so that's one approach. There are other programs from ISPs and from other providers of hotspots and what have you. There's a lot of efforts all over the place to try to get more and more people connected. I will say that we are on the cusp of a major investment in broadband expansion that was just passed in the recently adopted infrastructure law, that is going to pump roughly $65 billion into expanding broadband, advancing digital equity, helping with digital skills, and getting devices to people in need. And so we're on the cusp of a major broadband moment in America. And from my vantage point, from the device standpoint, we got to make sure devices are not an afterthought.
Does this affect the education that you provide, Joe and Cyndy, in terms of access, in terms of shaping it so that people are empowered to actually influence where investments take place in their communities?
Most certainly. I want to point out that the ACP provides access, but it doesn't provide equitable access, right? And so a family may have access to the internet, but you can't stream live while your kid is playing a video game, while someone's watching Netflix, while, you just can't do that. It just doesn't have the bandwidth. The other thing to point out about the ACP is it's finite, right? Those funds are reserved till 2024, I believe. So if it doesn't become law, then it's going to be tough to maintain. But the work that Digitunity is doing, Byte, et cetera, several others are out there making sure that ACP is a human right. It's a human right to have connection to the internet. You cannot do anything without access to the internet. And so the computer devices are useless without access to the internet. They're really doorstops, right? And so having access to the internet just opens a world to folks that traditionally wouldn't have access. A quick stat, I love stats. Quick stats, 1 out of 3 Americans ages 18 to 64 lack the digital skills to fully participate in the changing economy.
One out of three Americans?
1 out of 3 Americans aged 18 to 64 lack the digital skills that's required to fully participate in the future of work.
Well, that's ridiculous from an economic growth perspective, right?
No,
I mean, if economic growth is going to be driven by the integration of labor, technology, capital, and so on and so forth, to have 1 out of 3 people sitting on the sidelines, particularly on, in terms of the use of tech, is just insane.
It's problematic. It really is. I want to yield the remainder of my time to my colleagues.
Thanks. So Mark and Joe, I wanted to mention that today, digital equity, maybe it's a new term for a lot of folks, but digital equity is really health equity, it's educational equity, and it's economic equity. If we do not have access to that basic right of connection and communication through the internet or through whatever means, And so many things are enabled by technology, even paying your bills or checking your bank account. If you do not know where your resources are coming from, or if you have control over those, you really are not on the playing field. So whether it's decision making or communication, however we want to say it, we each have a human right to access that equally. And if we don't have the health outcomes, the educational outcomes that we desire, it gets back to the resources.
So how do we systemically change this? You know, we had the Tennessee Valley Authority that created electrification and other programs that created electrification in the heels of the Great Depression, right? We now have some of these other initiatives that you were naming to try and do something similar, but it seems that what we actually need is a collaborative process amongst the people who create these technologies and deploy them, businesses. We need government involved because we need to ease that process, regulation, and organize across state lines and so on and so forth. So federal and state people. We need citizens. We need people on the ground, nonprofit leaders like yourself, educators in schools. How do we change this so that it's an all-in kind of thing, that we're actually strengthening civil society and opportunity, business opportunity, economic opportunity? Could you just jump in, Scott, Joe, Cyndy, in terms of how you see the future ought to be different than the past?
I'd be happy to lead off and just mention that you know, the digital divide was deep before the pandemic. It was exacerbated by the pandemic, and a light was shown on it during the pandemic, but it's wider now than ever. And your question about how to solve this going forward, you know, we begun doing some work with the city of Columbus, Ohio, and the Columbus way, so to speak, is intentional, deep collaboration. And I think that really is the pathway to achieving digital equity across the country. That it can't be a top-down approach, because what you're trying to do is reach those most marginalized and most impacted. And a lot of times those folks are reached through the ground level, through community-based organizations, anchor institutions, housing authorities, and things like that. So philanthropy has to play a role. The corporate sector and all the corporate assets and technology and so forth needs to play a role. Community leaders, government needs to play a role. We've been advocating for a bill that's made its way through the House and is awaiting a floor vote in the Senate that would unlock federal surplus computers to be used to help students and veterans and older adults and low-income individuals, those with disabilities, to get them from the federal government, already paid for by tax dollars, out into communities. And it's things like that that we need to keep working on, attacking from every angle.
Joe, what do you think? You know, Scott's saying it's not top down, it's not bottom up, it's not inside, it's everything, right? How do you see it? And talk a little bit about what the spending priorities ought to be, because you can't spend everything on everything. Right. You have to spend something, you have to spend the most on something. What is the thing that we should be spending most on?
Great question. You know, first, special shout out to Scott. I mean, he's spot on. The collaborative approach to solving problems is exactly what's going to get us from where we are to where we need to be. And having the right key stakeholders having a seat at the table, right? If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so the goal is to make sure that every seat is filled with the proper stakeholders. Now, when you talk about the importance of where the funds should go, it should go to the boots on the ground, right? A lot of times, even with the ACP, working with internet service providers is probably not the best way to distribute funds, because there's a lack of community trust that the communities that we're trying to serve have with the government, if we're being transparent, have with big corporations, ISPs, et cetera. And so it needs to be funneled through the people who are on the ground, the folks who, when we knock on the door, they know it's us, they open the door, they know that we're there to help. So the priorities should be given to the boots on the ground. It should not funnel down. It should not go through corporations. It should be given directly to us, because we have a demonstrated history of knowing what to do with those resources.
As few intermediaries as possible.
Exactly right. And allow us to set up basically Socratic circles of folks who should be part of that table. And so, yes, boots on the ground should get the resources first.
Yep. So Joe, you'll be really glad to hear that in August, Kramden hosted a group from the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, and Department of Education, and there are going to be funds from federal government to allow us as local messengers, trusted messengers, to get the word out about ACP. And for us, devices is all through partnerships. We distribute devices to organizations that provide mattresses or provide kitchen appliances and habitat, in order to really serve the same people and make sure that we are collaborating. So I'm glad to hear that we are all on the same page about attacking it at every level. My background, I was at EPA. And then, so I've been in the federal government. I understand the need for really decentralized outreach and education. And then I was in private sector for 15 years. And private sector right now sees digital equity as a nice to have. It's a corporate social responsibility play. And I just wish that we will go beyond that and see it really as a building block for a strong workforce, the future of Americans who can really participate fully.
It's really interesting. We deal with the wealthiest people on the planet. We also deal with the poorest people on the planet. And we deal with people who connect those two interests through philanthropy. We also deal with government actors. We deal with different sectors, arts, environment, poverty, certainly, a lot of justice work and so on. But it's really interesting when you create the intersection with that, with technology, because technology is everywhere, right? You can't build housing without the technology in order to manage that process. Art, education, regardless as to what it is, if you're trying to save redwoods or save a species or clean the oceans, technology is everywhere in everything. So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
If technology isn't everywhere and the costs are really exorbitant to create this technology and then to deploy it, how do we function in a way where we're connecting the dots between what's going on in Columbus, what's going on in various urban centers, rural centers, even worldwide? How do we create this in a way where we can take your isolated initiatives and connect the dots between them in order to create more power and force and knowledge sharing amongst them beyond, shows like this? How do we do that?
For sure, great question. This is the beginning, right? Having these conversations and exposing organizations who are all over the country doing the same work is the beginning. Now we have 3 partners. I know I'm going to be speaking to Cyndy. I know I'm going to be speaking to Scot. And so it's really, the beginning is starting this. Now, the other thing is, this is a problem that most folks won't be able to ignore, right? When we look at 45 million American jobs being lost in the next 20 months due to automation and robotics, AI, et cetera, we can't ignore that, right? It's going to get to a point where you cannot ignore it. A, B, the tech companies or the big companies are going to run out of talent to hire because they're competing for the same talent. The folks are jumping from one place to the next place, et cetera. So what about that critical mass that needs to be built at the entry point, right? You folks won't have a choice but to accept and embrace this changing workforce. And so step 1 is conversations like these. Step 2 is getting the folks who can make the decisions to really see the problem as it is. The reason why it's not a priority for tech companies, because it's not affecting them personally, right? But once they start running out of a workforce, then it will. And that will absolutely happen in the next 2 years. And so the companies who embrace diversity and tech are the ones who are going to be around for the next 10 years.
Well, it used to be if you couldn't participate in the highly educated workforce, you participated in the manual labor workforce. Well, right. When warehouses are being picked and packed, where goods and warehouses are being picked and packed by robots, yep. And you can't work on an assembly line because the assembly line is staffed by computers and robots, right? And fields are actually being plowed automatically with somebody with a joystick. That's right. And a combine that is computer driven, right? And you can't get a bus driver job because buses are all automated, right? right there, you have a budding catastrophe for people who are not educated, in these various skill sets.
Yeah. In 10 years, 3/4 of jobs will require digital skills. And so you think about just how the gap gets wider and wider. And I want to come back to something that Joe said. And I think one of the ways that we need to attack this as society is to look at connectivity, digital skills as a human right, that we wouldn't be okay if students in school didn't have food or busing or didn't have paper and pencil, as you were talking about, Mark. We wouldn't be okay if people didn't have access to water or food. The internet is a must-have. It's not a nice to have. I mean, we need to treat it as the pathway to opportunity that unlocks doors for so many people. And so, the federal funding that's coming is a step in the right direction. We need to make sure that we keep stepping in that same direction going forward.
We asked a series of questions, Cyndy, and it was the responses were fascinating. The answers were all 100% must have, very important, relevant, advantageous, and so on. And we asked about high-speed internet, laptops, in other words, big screen devices, and cell phones, right, small screen devices. And in some categories, internet connectivity, everybody said absolutely 100% must have or very important. Everything else was, 80% at least of the people said 100% must have or very important. So you have really a consensus. Does that mean, Cyndy, that computers today are the equivalent, and I mean literal equivalent, of a piece of paper and a number 2 pencil when I was a kid?
Well, I think you think that we're very far in age, Mark, but yes, I would agree that if we were to redo Maslow's hierarchy, and that is a psychologist who talked about what are the basic needs, human needs: air, water, shelter, love, support. I think internet and computer are today's newest part of that hierarchy, because we're not communicating like today. We are not communicating if we didn't have a computer in front of us. I can't even think without my computer on.
Is it literally true, Cyndy, that the future of the American economy depends on this? Is that too bold a statement? Are we being overly dramatic?
For people who are not seeing the screen yet, we're all nodding. Yes,
yeah.
I think American economy and its growth is going to depend on leadership as well as vision and technology.
Joe, what do you think? I mean, if that's the case, then it doesn't matter if that is the case. I'm not saying it is, but let's say that is the case. Then it doesn't matter whether you're a conservative or a flaming conservative or a flaming liberal, right?
No.
If you want to be part of America and you want to see the country thrive, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness would be connected to something like this.
No question. Look, those 45 million jobs will be held by Republicans, independents, Democrats, folks who don't vote, folks who vote often. They'll be held by tall people, short people. It doesn't matter, right? This digital equity doesn't have a face, right? Tech equity is not inherently racist. It's just those people that need to be sitting at the table have not been invited. And so they need to be invited to the table. And so internet access and connectivity is like the new electricity, right? Just like AI, it's an undercurrent, right? We're using electricity now to power what we do. We don't realize that we use it, but it's an undercurrent. Internet connectivity, AI is the same thing. And that's going to be exactly what we're looking at in the next 4 or 5 years, where you need it. It's a basic human right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Maslow's no longer around. We need to add internet connectivity to that list.
I'm working on it. We're going to do a new poster.
Let's go.
And Scott, we'll give you the last word since we're coming to the end of our half hour. What do we do next? What do I do? What do all of us do? What do all of our listeners do? What do we do next to help this situation?
Yeah, technology reuse is such a pathway to helping connect people. Your retired tech in your home, your company's retired tech, get those items off to organizations that serve people in need. Change your internal IT policies that allow you to donate tech instead of just recycling it, shredding your hard drives and so forth. Contribute financially to organizations doing this work. This is critical right now, and it will continue to be critical for years in advance. And so get active, think about it. I mean, this is an issue that is pervasive, and we need to make sure that we continue this forward progress on into the future. Everybody who needs a connected computer should have one.
What a great way to end. Cyndy U. Robinson, Executive Director of the Kramden Institute in North Carolina, Joe Paul, CEO of Byte back in DC, and Scot Henley, Executive Director of Digitunity.
Digitunity, you got it.
I love it. It's really great to have people from across the United States come together and share the fact that we have so much in common, that we can actually solve these problems. And thank you so much. Thank you. Please thank your staffs. Please thank your boards, your funders, those people who contribute, and those people who volunteer. You are our heroes. Really, we so appreciate your time today.
And thank you, Mark, for putting a spotlight on what we're so passionate about.
Oh,
100%.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. The team behind me are the real heroes of this. We have these conversations. What needs attention, and we're so pleased to be that sort of small vehicle for your great work. Thank you so much.
I can't wait to see how this ages.
Take care.